One Spanish journalist was convinced that the Spanish basketball team included players who did not have a genuine intellectual disability. He apparently faked a disability himself and gained access to the team as a player. Went through the Sydney competition. Spain, as you will probably know, were the gold medal winners. And they went home to Spain, successful gold medalist basketball players, only to have the journalist then blow the whole thing across the media and demonstrate quite convincingly that not only had he managed to infiltrate the team, but several other players as well in that same Spanish squad had no significant intellectual impairment. It was apparently an organized attempt to bring people who had no disability into Paralympic Games whose only existence is to provide competition for those who genuinely have a disability. Consequently, the International Paralympic Committee at that time told INAS-FID that they had no alternative but to exclude athletes from further Paralympic competition until such time as INAS-FID could demonstrate to the satisfaction of the rest of the Paralympic family that they had systems, processes and procedures in place that would avoid a repetition of what happened in Sydney. The relationship between IPC and INAS-FID became worse rather than better. They were in an adversarial relationship rather than a cooperative relationship. And they had already missed Athens and they were about to miss Beijing when, among other things that were happening, I was encouraged both from within INAS-FID and from within IPC to become involved by standing for election as the INAS-FID president. 2 years ago, I became INAS-FID's president, and from the very beginning, my relationship with IPC has been based upon one of cooperation rather than aggression and conflict. And we set out almost immediately through a joint working party to identify ways that would satisfy both sides that the re-inclusion of athletes with intellectual disability in future Paralympic Games was achievable. It was a reasonable ambition, and if we worked together, it might even be achievable in time for London 2012. INAS-FID has always had qualifications, criteria that were necessary for athletes to demonstrate a genuine level of intellectual disability. Those typically, and without going into too much detail, it falls into three parts. There has to be the existence of an intellectual deficit which, measured by an IQ test, represents a score of 75 or less. There also has to be limitations in their adaptive behavior, in the way in which they behave and interact with other people. And the third requirement of INAS-FID has always been that this particular disability has to have been present whilst the individual was still a child, or at least before the age of 18. If those three conditions are met, INAS-FID has always said, even before Sydney, that there is a sufficient intellectual disability to warrant this sort of competition. What happened in Sydney, we now know to our cost, is that people who were organising these competitions and people who had no such disability were able together to complete forms and to present paperwork which convinced INAS-FID that there was a disability sufficient for them to be included in the competition. We have always had two problems. There is a problem faced by all disability groups in the Paralympic movement of minimal disability. There has always been a need to decide when a disability is so insignificant and so minor that it no longer merits special provision. The bigger problem that faced INAS-FID after Sydney was what can we do to avoid deliberate cheating. The way in which IPC and INAS-FID have worked together during the last 2 years has been very sport-focused, it has been research-driven, and we have identified an action plan which, if implemented by IPC and INAS-FID together, should provide the opportunity for all of us to be more confident in our ability, first of all, to identify genuine disability, and then to relate that disability to the context of sport. The third part, required by IPC for several years now, is to introduce some sort of protest and appeal procedure to be conducted at a games whenever there is doubt or whenever there is a challenge to an individual's eligibility. We are very close to having those 3 things in place. The real significance of all of this for these global games is that the organisers of the games, INAS-FID and IPC, have all decided that the athletes who are here will help refine the processes that we have been developing through data collection, through research and through testing of volunteer athletes from around the world. That is a logical consequence of the sort of test that is being developed. So what the researchers have done, again with the agreement of IPC and INAS-FID, is concentrate this summer on a limited number of sports. And their focus has been on the sports that attract the most competitors, basically. Athletics and swimming and table tennis and basketball, major sports of that kind. It would be foolish for any of us to expect that after such a long period of absence, re-inclusion in London 2012 by an entirely new system of monitoring would immediately be accessible to all of the 19 or 20 different sports in the Paralympic programme. So we are deliberately focusing on a small number of sports. We want to do the job properly, we want to re-establish confidence, and we want to be able to build on London 2012 so that in 2016, wherever those games may be, there should be a greater opportunity in a larger number of sports for a larger number of athletes. Future of global games, I believe, will be a permanent celebration of a large number of sports by a large number of athletes with intellectual disabilities, not to compete with the Paralympic Games, but to actually provide a platform for a wider involvement of quality athletes with intellectual disabilities, from whom the best would then be able to go on to participation in Paralympic Games.